understood this. That's why, for example, if you read a research paper, part of the research paper in the beginning, the methodology is definition of everything is used. Okay, the methodology of this is that this word means this. ACS, acute coronary syndrome, for example, I'm going to use some medical terms because that's my specialty. It means it's a constellation of findings that constitute a presentation that's acute, for example, in the coronary artery inflammation and plaque rupture and so forth, so that there is no mistake and somebody comes in and interjects a different idea. One of the very common verses in the Quran, which is this verse, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, had been misinterpreted for about a few hundred years. And that is, God does not prescribe upon a soul something that it cannot do or is not within its reach. So people, you would go tell people that, can you do this? Well, you know, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. God does not prescribe on a soul something that it cannot do. There's a joke that I got in the email a few days ago, and that's it's a kind of the difference of mentality between a Japanese and they said a Syrian. So I got that as a Syrian. So, and the Japanese attitude is that if no one can do it, I can do it. I think you got that probably in the email as well. And if everyone can do it, I can do it as well. So the same thing applies to Syrian. If anyone can do it, let him do it. And if no one can do it, oh my God, do you want me to do it? So this is the thing of understanding. It's the same thing that maybe two different cultures understand. So going back to this verse, we have to understand it within the context. If God has prescribed something upon me, it is within my reach because God does not prescribe something outside your reach. So if God said you can fast Ramadan, for example, then you can fast Ramadan because if it was not possible to fast Ramadan, Allah would not have prescribed Ramadan on me. And then, even when you fast, there are exemptions. For example, what are the exemptions of not fasting? Is getting sick. Is what else? Traveling. So those are exemptions. You have to understand those exemptions. But you can't be sick all the time. So if you're sick all the time, then that takes you to a different category, so that you can never be able to fast, but that's fine, but you have to do something else to make up for it. This thing started also when the Muslims and the early Arabs in about the 3rd century of Islam, which is about the 8th century AD, they started the translation. And the most important Arabic translator and the Arabic scholar at that time was Al-Jahil. And he wrote few excellent books. And he, in order to minimize the language effect, he made rules for translation. And those rules are still in effect until today when you translate. He said, if somebody wants to translate one science to the other, then the translator should be professional in both languages, and he should be professional in the science that's being translated in both languages in order to be able to translate, to minimize what you can be able to translate. So, for example, you go to Google Translator today. Of course, it's gotten better, but you go and you put something in. Sometimes you laugh at it. If you put, there's a very famous book called Al-Milal wal-Nihal. Al-Milal wal-Nihal means it's a book about sects, basically, that and tribes that existed in Islam until a certain year. You put Al-Milal wal-Nihal Google Translator and you laugh at what you get. You get boredom and bees. Al-Malal wal-Nahal. So you have to understand that language is a very important component of conveying ideas, and you have to understand its limitation and use it appropriately. So this is Al-Jahiz who made those. The next thing is the rule and the example, or the rule and exception, the rule and the exemption. Every rule has exceptions. That's a rule in itself. Every rule has exceptions. Now, what we have to understand, for example, is sometimes you are trying to convey to someone a rule. They bring an exception to the rule just to like put a pin in a balloon, in your balloon, and make it blow up. I'll give you an example. You come and talk about poverty and children poverty, and you say that a child that is poor has a lesser chance than success in life in terms of education, for example, than a rich child. So then somebody comes, no, 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 I have a neighbor who was very poor. And now he went in, he endured and did this and did that, and now he's very successful. That is true, but that's not the rule. The rule, if I have 1,000 children that are poor and 1,000 children that are not poor, that are rich, those 1,000 children have a higher chance of making it to life because they have the means necessary, for example, for education. Each one of you is paying a hefty sum of money just to come to Y Cornell and study medicine, or come to the other parts of education city and study. So a poor child cannot afford that. Of course, somebody might get a scholarship. That is true. They might get a scholarship, but not everybody is going to get a scholarship. So understanding that is very important. Then you go in, you have to justify what you said. So you have to understand, for the same example that I'm talking about, a poor child. A poor child, that means their parents are poor. So their parents tend to do what? They take them out of school in the poor countries and they throw them into the workplace just to help them make ends meet. So that child goes out without an education. Of course, he'll know something, whatever his father was doing. And then he ends up, of course, compared to the same level child, he ends up poor. When he's poor, what will he do to his child? He'll do the same thing to his child and again throw him in the workplace. So it becomes a vicious circle that needs to be broken. Parts of this was broken, of course, making studying up to the 12th grade mandatory in many countries, and this happened in the 20th century. Also, surgeons and those who do procedures like us, we make mistakes. We call it mistakes. And then when we make a mistake, we call it a statistic. And that statistic could be somebody who passed away because of whatever we did. So we have a saying that comes from surgery in medicine. Good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So at one time, somebody made a bad call, and the patient died. That becomes a statistic, and then that helps the other patients. So that's understanding, again, the rule and the exemption. However, that doesn't mean that an exception in itself cannot become a rule. In other words, it can stand alone as an example to something. And I'll give you an example. With the Arab Spring, no one on earth before December last year ever thought that the Egyptians, that the Tunisians, that no one thought that they can be free. And I still remember it was the 18th of January. I was at home with a friend of mine, and he's a very prominent Egyptian. We were at home, and then suddenly on Facebook, I see this, okay, appointment 25th January. So I said, Fadil, it's over. He said, what's over? He said, Mubarak is gone. And we kept like for 1 hour arguing in my living room. He would say, no, no, no. He is not. It was beyond anything. So the rule became that the Arabs are there to be servants and like backwards forever. And that's not true. So, and of course the youth proved it by marching to the squares, marching to the streets, that they're able to kick people. Of course, it didn't happen the same scenario everywhere, but it turned out to be that the rule is when the people say yes, we want this, that this is what goes. Part of the rule and the exception is understanding numbers. Numbers means statistics. You cannot understand a rule without understanding statistics. That's why statistics today, for example, in the States, is taught in high school. And even it starts in middle school. That means you need, just an incident out of the blue doesn't mean anything until you attach a percent to it. Then you understand the significance of it. Is this, and this is what I, for example, when I teach the medical students, we discuss something and the medical students are always fascinated by what we call the zebras. And I tell them when we hear galloping, we think of horses. You don't think of zebras. You're not. If you hear a gallop outside here, it's probably either a horse or a camel. It's not going to be a zebra. Now, in the Serengeti, that's different. If you're going in the Serengeti and you hear galloping, then you understand your surrounding. That could be zebras. That could be other types of cattle. But if you hear it somewhere in a very common place, you should think of horses. And the same thing is understanding numbers, because numbers attach a significance to words and ideas. And if you look here, for example, and this is this is old. This is probably in 2006. This is word ihsa, statistics in Arabic, and you can see there are about 80 sites that talk about statistics. And if you look at statistics in English, there's about 590,000 sites talking about statistics or mentioning the word statistics. We don't emphasize numbers. Emphasizing numbers is important. If you don't, it's easy to slip into the bias, into a language of bias that does not rely on data and does not rely on numbers. Dichotomies. What's a dichotomy? A dichotomy is you have a choice between two things, but it's difficult to choose, because if you choose one thing, you might be sacrificing the other and vice versa. So we'll talk about some of those dichotomies. This is the yin-yang of the Chinese. This is the black and white. Dichotomies are not black and white. Sometimes you can choose this because the other option is not viable at this time, but then at different times you might be able to switch, and we'll talk about some of them. Some of the dichotomies: quantity and quality. What's better? And we'll discuss this. Freedom and tyranny. One, for example, freedom could come with chaos. Tyranny comes with order. But it's tyranny, you lose your freedom, so which one would you choose? Pathway and energy. You want to reach a destination, but you have only so much energy to use it. So which one would you sacrifice? Would you go all the way, minding that you might lose your energy, and so forth? Shape and content also. What's more important? So the quality and quantity. In Islam, both are important. It's not only quality. Some people think that it's only quality that's important, but quantity is important. Quantity is important as well, because in order to have quality, you need something to have the quality on, and that has quantity in it. So understanding that but which one is more important? And we'll talk about that. For example, there is something called vertical knowledge, and there's something called horizontal knowledge. Horizontal knowledge is where we spread knowledge, for example, in all schools, in like elementary schools. Here, you really need quantity. You want to reach as many children as you can in terms of conveying this. But as the degrees go higher and specialization of science becomes imminent, because you don't need as much people specialized in an area, then you're looking really at quality. However, there will be times, for example, that you need quality and quantity at the same time. And I'll give you an example. San Diego. San Diego is a little city, it's a large city, one of the most beautiful cities in the States. And it was divided by those who were doing medical planning into 4 quarters: northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. And then what they did, they got the total population, men, women, etc. And then they looked at medical specialties. When they looked at the medical specialties, they started using numbers. So for example, they'll have X number of family practitioners, general practitioners, cardiologists, OB, surgeons, orthopedics, etc., in all of them. Then they looked at terms of, now, the purpose of having doctors, a number of doctors, is to fulfill the need of the society. So they said, okay. They looked and they said the north, I forgot which one, but I'll give an example. The northeast sector of the city is the poor sector, and the southwest is the rich sector. Now, the poor sector, for example, had less numbers of family practitioners to satisfy or fulfill the needs of that part of town. But they said, we don't need to work on this. Why? They said because a